David Holthouse is not afraid of getting too close to the story. His tolerance for risk is extraordinarily high, a skill he says stems from surviving a sexual assault as a child. For almost 30 years, he's investigated stories others wouldn't touch. His most notable deep dive reporting includes spending 72 hours awake with a group of people addicted to drugs, documenting the effects on their bodies, becoming voluntarily homeless to understand young people living their lives on the streets, and even going undercover to infiltrate neo-Nazi groups and street gangs. David says his experience gave him the strength that would become the driving force for his crusade to chase down the truth, even among what he calls the monsters and demons that make up the cast in the stories he reports. David joins us now. Let me tell you, I know why, because you want to get to the truth. Thank you so much for joining us. But I have to ask you, is this the only way, David, to get to the bottom of some of the things you investigate by going undercover like this?
Well, it's the best way that works for me.
Well, you know what? There you have it. Drop the mic. I mean, because it is working and you do a phenomenal job. I always wonder what motivates people, because I think most people want to see things that are wrong exposed. They want to see people, for example, in the case of the story you did on those addicted to drugs, you want to humanize them and understand how they get there. But what is it in your wiring, in your background, that I guess gives you the courage to not just, pick at it? You rip the Band-Aid off.
Well, I trace it back to being sexually assaulted when I was 7 years old. And I remember during the sexual assault disassociating, meaning that part of me was like, this is too terrifying, this is too painful, I'm simply going to leave my body now for a while. And when I'm working undercover or finding myself in these dangerous situations in the process of reporting a story, I can use that disassociation experience in a sort of targeted way, meaning that I can disassociate a little bit from the fear that an average person might be experiencing.
So basically, you believe that you have this ability to compartmentalize, and that really resonates with me, because when I did do that undercover story in Dallas Fort, I remember my heart pounding. We were hiding in the bushes, and I could not, at some point, even control my body from shaking. And I hadn't done anything wrong, and I certainly wasn't in any danger. But it's the idea of being undercover. So you have this ability to manage your fear, and you're going into this situation that you know is dangerous. Do you, in your mind, handicap, for example, when you're with these neo-Nazis? Okay, if they find out I'm undercover, what do I do?
No, if they find out I'm undercover, I'm a dead man. Okay, or at least I'm going to the hospital that day. But the worst thing you can do working undercover is show fear or be afraid. And that's where the disassociation comes in. Meaning, if you exhibit fear, the criminals, the bad guys, are going to ask themselves, why is this person afraid? Apparently, they don't belong here. And that's a dangerous situation to be in. So the disassociation, I think, sort of creates a buffer between the way I'm perceiving the experience and the fear that it should sort of naturally engender in someone that is in such a dangerous underworld.
Part of your reporting, you will go into disguise, or you will transform yourself. With the neo-Nazis, you got a tattoo to try and fit in and fit the part. I could not have just walked in. They wouldn't have fallen for that. But they're going to fall for you walking in for obvious reasons. But you even had to enhance your appearance with a tattoo. There was a moment, though, when your cover was almost blown, when you were embedded with them. And you really did think, okay, this is over. What happened there?
It was the first time that I went undercover as a neo-Nazi skinhead. And I had spent about a month being trained by an investigator with an organization called the Anti-Defamation League, who taught me how to walk and talk like a skinhead, taught me the skinhead ideology, made sure I had the clothing right, the music right. And one of the things that was important was the vehicle that I was driving. It needed to be an American-made sedan, and it needed to have the right sort of litter inside the car, meaning to the extent where I deliberately went and got a parking ticket and crumpled it up and stuck it under a seat. Fast food wrappers, receipt to the grocery store with certain brands of beer and certain kinds of food that skinheads like, just crumpled up and left there, cigarette butts of a certain brand, that kind of thing. So if the car got searched, the evidence would read right to them that I was one of them.
Wow.
And also to the extent where I had a CD by a skinhead band in the CD player in the car, so that if they turned it on, the music would be right. Mm. And I thought I'd gone through every inch of the car, but I was not. They didn't. I talked to them later, and they didn't think I was a cop, but they knew that there was something off about me. And at one point, the skinheads jacked me up against a wall behind a hotel and tore the car apart. Went through the trunk, to the extent that they were, carving up the upholstery to look in the seats. And this went on for 15, 20 minutes. And I was just hoping that I'd gotten everything right. And they did turn on the stereo to see what music I was listening to. And so when they did that, I thought, okay, I think I'm actually going to get away with this. I think I'm going to be all right, because that was a nice touch. But the ones that were searching on the passenger side of the car, I could tell that two of them started to get excited, and they called over the rest of them. And then they came up, and what they had found was underneath the floor mat on the passenger side of the car, they'd found a CD by an artist named Annie DeFranco, because this is a friend of mine's car that I borrowed. And she was an Annie DeFranco fan. And Annie DeFranco, if you don't know, was a very liberal folk singer, not what you would find in neo-Nazi's car. And so when they came up with that CD, I thought I was cooked.
David, we went to break and you had all of us like on edge of our seat. You had been investigating neo-Nazis and you thought you'd gotten everything down, your physical appearance, you transformed the kind of car you drive, all of these things. And at some point they discovered a folk singer's CD in your car, which is not what you described as typical music they would be listening to. Once that was, how did you get yourself out of that?
I just thought fast, and I came up with a story about how this was a friend of mine. She wasn't my girlfriend, but she was a friend of my girlfriend, and I'd been trying to convert her to the movement, and she must have been trying to hide the CD from me before I borrowed her car, because I was trying to convert her to the white power movement, but she was being a little resistant to it, and she must have hidden the CD from me, and that's why it was. That's
elaborate. That's an elaborate story to come up on the at spur of the moment. Did they buy it? Well, you're here, so they clearly bought it.
Yeah, they did buy it. They did buy it. Yeah.
Is there a line you won't cross, David? Because, I've heard people go into initiations and things like this, and then at some point to test whether or not you are a cop or to test whether or not you're a reporter, you're asked to do things that are either immoral or illegal. Are you prepared for those kinds of moments?
I was prepared to do things that were illegal but not immoral. In other words, I was never going to go out and hurt someone in the name of the white power movement in order to prove myself. So whenever it got to that sort of status, then I would just disappear. I would fade away from the organization because I was not going to take part in that.
So you have lines in the sand that you're willing to draw here clearly. But in this new report that you have, this docuseries Sasquatch, you're investigating this homicide that took place in North California in 1993. What drew you to this particular story?
Well, I was working on a marijuana farm in Northern California in 1993. And at the time that I was up there, there was this story making the rounds about how 3 men had been found dead on a black market weed farm. Their bodies had been torn apart. And it was clear from the footprints at the scene of the killings that a Bigfoot had killed these guys. And of course, I didn't believe that story, but the way it was being circulated and the fear in the eyes of some people that were telling this story, I always thought that there was probably something there. Something being, I always thought that 3 men had actually lost their lives on a black market marijuana farm. And for some reason, the backstory to the murder got twisted up to attribute it to a mythical creature. And so I just thought it was time to go and try and track that legend back to its source.
Wow. Well, listen, I can't say that I envy the job that you do because I am not built for that. But I do greatly admire the work you do, especially as it relates to solving these cold cases and also humanizing, for example, the face of people who are homeless, teenagers. So the great work you do is worthy of celebrating. The risks, I'm going to leave to you in uncovering the truth. But thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And by the way, Sasquatch is streaming on Hulu.